Hi, my name's Caroline Beckett. I'm Vicar of Brightlingsea, and Andy Griffiths and I are recording a series of podcasts on Christian leadership as community organising in a pandemic. For the first time, Andy isn't alongside me, but I'm very pleased to say that Matthew Bolton is. Could you introduce yourself and explain what you do?
Hello, Caroline. It's very nice to be here. Yeah, I'm Matthew Bolton. I'm the director of Citizens UK. And so I'm a community organiser and have been doing that for the last 14 years with Citizens UK, and love it, and even love it during this strange period of lockdown, where I'm also a dad. I've got a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old here in the house, and my partner, we live in South East London. And so, yeah, trying to juggle work and family like a lot of people are right now.
So how did you get involved in community organising in the first place? Because that's a long time that you've been involved. What started it all off?
Well, it started off with, I guess I was found by an organiser, as is often the way with this. I was at university. I was studying sort of social science, social political science. What I cared about at that time was really from my experience growing up here. I live actually now near where I grew up. In Southeast London, and growing up here, you just can't help but seeing the big gap between different children's opportunities in life. You know, some people around here, you know, there are big houses. I got a scholarship from to a private school when I was 11. I went there for 5 years. So I went from Southeast London State Primary School to private school for 5 years, back to South London, you know, comprehensive sixth form. And so it meant I just had friends who, you know, some of whom were very privileged and had cars bought for them and everything like that, and had, you know, playing fields and cricket and just a really supportive environment for them. And, you know, you knew where they were going in life. And other friends who were really struggling with, you know, with poor housing, with parents who were working, you know, multiple jobs, with the threat of street crime around and very present in their lives, and then classrooms that were loud and aggressive, and I just had the first-hand experience of that. So when I went to study social science, it was very much about, like, what is going on there, how comes that inequality is happening, and what can we do about it. And so when I first heard about it, was more the living wage campaign really than community organising that I heard about. But I just thought, that's so brilliant, so simple. Like, if someone's working a full-time job, they should earn enough to provide for their family. And that just seems so relevant to my experience and to what I thought was important. And so, yeah, so I just got involved in that campaign. And it was through the campaign that I then realised, oh, there's a whole method that underpins this campaign, which is why it's working, which is why it's making a difference. And the thing that got me, like, hooked at that time was the experience of actually winning something. You know, we won this campaign and saw the difference it made with people's lives. And so that was the beginning of this whole journey since then.
So for those who aren't aware of the living wage campaign, what was it that you were trying to achieve with that? And what was the win that you actually got? Because the win was massive, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. So the living wage is basically about, you know, if on the legal minimum wage, you know, even if you're working, you might be working full time, but you're still not actually earning enough to pay for your, you know, your rent and your bills and your travel and your food and your kids and all the rest of the things you've got to pay for. And so the living wage campaign is basically setting this higher, like, calculated level to say, yeah, you can afford a basic standard of living if you earn this, and it's higher than the legal minimum. So we're basically trying to persuade Queen Mary University. This was the first campaign I was involved in, to say, actually, there's cleaners here, catering staff here that are being ignored and are being badly treated. And it wasn't just the wages, actually. When you get under the skin of it, it was the not proper sick pay, you know, bullying, and no career progression of any sort. People stuck in the job. And so, yeah, it was profound on two counts. Profound because I really got a first-hand experience of what life is like on the minimum wage, particularly, like, as a migrant worker doing that kind of job, and, like, was hanging out with these people a lot. and I'm so impressed by some of their courage and leadership, and saw that, and helping them win the campaign. And so when we won, there was 150 people suddenly got, a proper job and actually brought back in house. And it was completely, really, really profound impact on me to think that I could be part of something which would actually make a difference.
So how relevant is community organising now as we semi-emerge from lockdown?
More relevant than ever, really. I mean, for me, this experience has really shone a light on a lot of the injustices that have been motivating people across Citizens UK for years. I mean, right now, we've got care workers, carrying on that living wage theme, who are still, getting on the bus, getting in their cars, going into people's homes, providing such vital work, keeping people alive. And these are our parents and grandparents and loved ones, and they're earning minimum wage on 0 hours contracts. And lockdown has just shown shown again what an injustice that is, and people putting themselves at risk for such little reward. So a lot of the campaigns that we're working on are kind of more relevant and urgent than ever, whether it's about child hunger or immigration insecurity and so on, but also the organising itself, the building of relationships between people, helping people recognise their own power, their own agency, at a time when we're all at a distance from each other, and we have to be, for good reason. So we're trying to adapt. It's funny because, as you've probably heard about in some of these other podcasts, the importance of the one-to-one conversation and face-to-face, and the whole method is really about how we can build relationships with one another. And we're having to just adapt that to a online reality, primarily online reality, and trying to keep people connected. But it's been surprising. Like, sometimes actually we found that there are people perhaps who we thought we were being inclusive and say, we don't do too much online because it's all about face-to-face meetings, and some people can't get onto these digital platforms. But actually we found there are some people who are engaging now in the training and action that's taking place, who perhaps weren't coming to the physical meetings in the evening because of kids and caring responsibilities. So there are some surprising things about how the organising can adapt, and who gets included and excluded.
Yeah, and that's a hobby horse of mine too, don't you? Because I've bent your ear about it before, about involving different groups of people. We've sort of been finding that ourselves as well here in Brightlingsea. What have
you found? How's it been for you then in lockdown, and as we're starting to look out in Brightling-on-Sea?
Well, I think the funny thing is we've found that there is no one sort of magic bullet for how to get through lockdown for a community, because what you find is that there are layers and layers and groups within community, and communities are really complex organisms. So we've been operating throughout the lockdown in 4 circles. So one of our circles is a Zoom meeting. So we have a Zoom Sunday service, and we have participants somewhere between 25 and 40 people who participate actively in the Zoom service. So they read bits out, they share bits, they do the prayers, they do a reflection or a thought for the day or what have you, and interact and create that. And then that gets recorded, and it then goes onto Facebook. And the second circle of people who can do Facebook but don't do Zoom will then watch that and interact with it and comment and so on. And then a third sort of circle of people are people that we reach by email. So they'll either just read the email, or they'll click the link in the email and it'll take them to other places. But they're confident with email, but not necessarily with either Facebook or Zoom. And then you've got the fourth circle of people who are not connected online at all. And so for them, it's been phone calls, it's been letters, it's been, making sure things go through their letterbox regularly so that we keep them in contact. Working out, who are the people who are going to ring them up and just check that they're still connected in and all right, and getting a phone tree going so that, there's me and my sort of fellow ministers at the top, and then, there's the next level of the pastoral team underneath, and then underneath that, there are people who call other people and so on, which means that if Mrs. Jones's husband ends up in hospital, then it comes back up the tree to me and I know what's happening and so on. Now, it doesn't always work perfectly because human beings and all of that, but it does work really well most of the time. So that has got us through. And what we're finding now that we're beginning to think about returning to the buildings is that realistically, in the seats on a Sunday morning when we do a service post-lockdown, will be a cross-section of all those 4 circles. So we're going to need to maintain all of those 4 circles, all of those things still going, while at the same time trying to forge a new look service in the building, which isn't going to be the same as it was before. But one of the great things about the Zoom service is that it's hit fast forward on and really accelerated something we were doing anyway, which was about getting members of the church more actively involved in creating the services that they come to. And so what we have got now is a group of people who are capable of leading, who've done it, who've gained their confidence and so on, and who are quite willing to carry that through into the physical building. So it's not that we as ministers run around like crazies post-lockdown trying to keep 12 plates spinning. What it is that we together are exploring, who are we now in this new normal? What is it that we want to take forward from the things we've learned? What is it that we want to leave behind and forget about? What is it from what we were doing before that we want to resurrect? And are there things from what we were doing before that actually we're quite happy to let die a quiet death? We'll let coronavirus finish those things off. We won't put them back into the newly cleaned cupboard, as it were, that we've just sorted out. And so those 4 questions are questions that we're asking ourselves. And we have decided that actually an online presence is really important because, as you were saying, it enables people to engage and participate and even to lead who would not be able to do that as confidently in a physical space. So yeah, that has been something we've really been exploring. It's been good.
That sounds very interesting. Yeah, and I understand you've written a poem about that we can hear.
This has become a bit of a thing in these podcasts. Yeah. So this one actually is written because this has emerged from some conversations I've been having with people who are not emerging. Because we talk about emerging from lockdown, and of course not everyone is emerging, because those who are shielding are very much not emerging, although some of them are being forced to emerge by the end of the furlough scheme and so on, and they're saying, well, I might not be here next year because I'm going to have to go back to work even though I've got this profound medical condition that means if I get coronavirus I'll die, and so but they can't afford not to work. So I've been having those conversations with fellow priests who are shielding or have got family members that means they need to be shielding, those who've lost loved ones who can't, well, hey, we're out in the light now, we can go and do what we want. They're not celebrating because now the grief is hitting them like a ton of bricks, and people who just don't know what to believe, know the coronavirus is still out there, can't make up their mind whether to wear a mask or not. It's that whole sort of middle ground dilemma for them. So that's what this is about. Triumphant we emerge from the storm that has howled above our heads. The world is bright stepping into the light, but not all of us. Instead, there are empty seats at the table, those loved and lost this while, dark gaps of grief like broken teeth in our triumphant smile. The trumpet calls, rebuild, reclaim, but not all of us are grinning, and it's hard to clap if you're still trapped and the world has kept on spinning. In a storm, we always lose the most who have the least to lose. If your shelter's thin, then the rain gets in and you're shivering the blues. So please forgive our somber tone, our spectres at your feast. While it's bright for you, we're still soaked through. Throw us a towel at least. For the rich, the choice is this or that. For the poor, it's life or death. You're laughing brave at the second wave. We're still catching our breath. So we've covered the first 4 stages of community organising in these podcasts. We've looked at organising, listening, planning and action. Could you start us thinking about the final stage, which has to do with negotiation?
Definitely, yeah, and it's good to mention again the other stages, because it's just important to kind of locate the negotiation part in that sequence, or in some kind of sequence, some kind of ongoing engagement, rather than a kind of standalone. And I'll just maybe tell a little story of when I think that I got that wrong in cringeworthy fashion, which should be in the early days of my organising. I remember taking a team to go and see Hackney Council. It was the mayor of Hackney Council, and I just sort of recently into the job, so I hadn't really picked up much of what had gone before in terms of that relationship. We hadn't really built much of our power. We hadn't really done our organising. We kind of lifted a couple of campaign issues that people had just mentioned. We hadn't really done any action to get ourselves noticed, but we'd got access. We had managed to get, one person knew the mayor's advisor enough to get us a meeting. And so I remember sitting outside, and the meeting was supposed to start at 3:00 or something. And by 3:30, unfortunately, the mayor was still busy, and we were all twiddling our thumbs and not quite knowing what to do. And then we went in there, and we had a list of, sort of 6 campaign demands, which of course, were all given very polite no's, and we walked out without much to show for it. And, I realized that although we may have had a timekeeper, we may have had roles, we may have had our plan A and plan B, but that negotiation as a moment didn't sit in a process of organising and building power and really understanding what was possible to achieve. And so yeah, just to say how important it is that the negotiation is a moment of interaction, but unless it sits within the other stages, of organising and listening and planning and action, it's unlikely to be very successful. So I always keep the complete failures close to my mind, even if they're a long time ago, and there's plenty of failures that aren't so long ago. But so just to kind of draw out some of the principles, and I'll tell a story of a better one in a second. So power and self-interest and relationships are, I guess, the 3 universals to think about with any negotiation, and they're the universals that are also going on in the other stages of organising too. But what power do we have on the team that we're in? Who do we represent? What listening have we done? What organisations are we from? How have we demonstrated that power recently? What kind of power would we have to push? And if it's a no or a not yet, how could we actually push that forward? So the first universal being power, and also sometimes do the person that we're meeting actually have the power to say yes?
Yeah, fallen foul of that one a time or two.
Kind of overestimate in the power analysis. You kind of assume, they're the decision maker, so of course they could say yes to our proposal. But really understanding their power too, and who are they accountable to, and what are the pressures on them. And so power analysis being the kind of first universal. And the second one being self-interest. And usually in organising, it's the listening campaign and the sort of coming together and hearing and voting, which establishes our common self-interest, what we're going in to try and achieve. But of course the interest of the other and of the other party, and I'll expand and unpack that a little bit with the example I'll give. So, and then relationship, as I say, it sits in a context, and usually we're not going to get what we want from the one negotiation. It's almost always going to be a series of negotiations where a relationship is established and some common interest is established. And so even if it feels like we're not getting anywhere in that first one, at least trying to secure another meeting is pretty much always a good way to end, so that meeting is going to be, that relationship is going to be ongoing. The one that comes to mind that went a bit better than the Hackney Council one was with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions at that time, about 5 years ago. There was Ian Duncan Smith. And So this negotiation did sit in a series of actions, and the actions that we've been taking very recently were working with cleaners in the department to leave a letter on his desk. So you can imagine the layers of power and authority between the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and the cleaner who happens to clean his desk. But the creative action that we were carrying out with these workers, and one particularly amazing woman called Giulietta, was that she would, very polite, from 50 of the cleaners, would you meet with us, and leave it on his desk. And the Times newspaper was covering it. And so we got the meeting on the back of some organising and some action. And we were trying to understand Ian Duncan Smith's self-interest. So he's a Catholic. There was a Catholic priest who was chairing the meeting, talking about Catholic social teaching and talking about the living wage and its Catholic roots, but also the big reforms that Ian Duncan Smith was trying to push through around universal credit were all under the banner of making work pay. So there was a cleaner, a guy who had an amazing story of he's got 3 kids and a bad back, and his wife was saying to him, "Why do you bother? You know, why you're breaking your back going into work. You could just quit that job, we go on to benefits, we wouldn't even be that much worse off." And he delivered this straight to Ian Duncan Smith. "The reason I go into work every day is because I never want my kids to say that their dad didn't work." And you could just see this story, which was completely, that was his honest truth, delivered to the Secretary of State, Work and Pensions, whose whole thing was about making work pay. So there was testimony, there was an understanding of their interest and their perspective on the issue, and we had a team, and of course, as I say, that was one meeting. All that we got in that meeting was, "This sounds interesting, please speak to my special advisor and the head of this other, the head of operations." But we had got the in-principle agreement, and that's what led to the implementation of the living wage in the Department for Work and Pensions, benefiting a couple of thousand people, but also on the way to getting the government to introduce the national living wage. So that was a negotiation that went a lot better. And so power, self-interest, part of a relationship, and then I'd say, in that case, the testimony was a real was a tactic that just really landed that meeting.
Yeah. And you can't really refute somebody's story, can you? Because it's somebody's story. And we are, as human beings, very susceptible to stories. And that's why we do a lot of storytelling in community organising. We tell the stories of successful and unsuccessful actions, and we learn from them. And we tell the stories of the people that we are doing this with, because it is about doing with and not doing for, isn't it? And we may not have direct experience. I mean, I've campaigned on things that I have no direct experience of whatsoever. And my sole purpose in the meeting is to facilitate people telling their stories and getting what they want on the table. And I have no skin in the game as such, but they do. And so their stories are powerful because this is real life for them. This is what they're living, and this is what they're doing. And I sympathise with the fighting through the layers and trying to find the person who can say yes, because I can remember one negotiation that we thought was massively successful. The guy was really on our side, was totally getting it, and then said, "But of course, I'll represent this to my boss and see if we can get him to agree." And I thought this was within your operational remit, and it isn't. It's I had to go one rung up, and I thought, oh no, we've got somebody else to convince. So you do have to sort of get through the layers, and it was a good relationship, but it's a relationship we still have. But there's a saying that I quite like, which is don't burn bridges you might later wish to cross.
Yeah.
And that sense of actually not throwing away relationships.
That's exactly, it is about relationships, and it takes time. Whenever you tell the story of something that happened, you usually kind of lift out that moment where it feels like something shifted, but actually that moment was one of, 50 different things that were tried, and some worked and some didn't work. And like you say, even if maybe one of those meetings was with someone who didn't have the power to make the change, or it didn't seem like it went that well, you never quite know. Actually, sometimes surprising things can come from those. So although we talk about tension in negotiations, and there was definitely tension at that point, it's balancing the tension, constructive tension, about trying to get a relationship, because we want to win people over, and like you say, the stories can win people over, but yeah, always approaching it in a sense of like, how is this going to lead to the next, how is this thing going to go well and lead to the next thing.
Now, if people wanted to read a book all about this, I know you've written one. Can you say a little bit about it before we end?
Yeah, so how to resist is a book which basically starts off saying, you're not involved in community organising, but you've maybe, you've been on a march, and in today's lockdown, you've clicked on petitions, and you're angry about the way things are going, and you want to do more, but you're not quite sure how. And so How to Resist basically lays out the how to use community organising to make a change. And it's interesting because the people who have read it, and some people, it's very much like, oh, I really want to campaign, to improve my local park, which is, we can't use because there's dog mess, or there's antisocial behaviour. But actually, a lot of people say, oh, I read the book and it really just made me think about my work, and how I can be more influential at work, and the fact that my boss doesn't listen to me, and actually people have used the tools of community organising in very kind of practical, everyday. It's interesting, isn't it? It often, the principles and the method, it makes sense to people. It's very accessible. The heritage is civil rights movement, and this is not supposed to be some weird technical method over there. It's everyday politics with a small p. It's every day getting things done. How do you work with people? How do you understand power? So anyway, it's How to Resist. And the whole idea was, how can we make this method accessible to the tens of thousands of people out there who want to make a change?
So next time, Andy and I will be talking about broad-based means in community organising. And we'll be looking in a little bit more detail at some of these things that we've talked about today. So today we've been At a Distance, rethinking Christian community. Thank you, Matthew, very much for your time.
Thank you, Caroline.